This is the weekly conversation show that Music Cities Together hosts. For those of you new to our conversation, Music Cities Together is a partnership between Music Policy Forum and Sound Music Cities. We are focused on trying to elevate and bring forward best practices and strategies and ideas and perspectives on what's happening in this unbelievably complicated and challenging world that we are living in as it relates specifically in this conversation to music and to the role of music in civic life in cities. This is Michael Bracy joining you from just outside of Washington, D.C. We have a really, every week I say we have a awesome series of guests, and this is no exception. I'm really thrilled about today's conversation. And I'm really thrilled that all of you across the world are joining us because you have a lot of things to do and a lot of Zoom meetings to attend. So we are appreciative that you are Zooming with us. As always, I want to give a huge shout out to Alex Dolden. Alex is producing the program and helping with our tech. We couldn't do this without him, and we'll be bringing in some other guests who we are going to thank for bringing Alex to us. I want to flag again that archives of previous programs are all available on the Music Policy Forum YouTube page. So you can go see those archives if you're interested in catching up on past conversations. And as always, if you have questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, ideas, stuff we should know about, you can always hit us up at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. So before we get into the formal part of today's conversation around data and analytics and around what's happening with non-commercial radio, I want to bring in a couple of special guests who've been on previous programs, Gigi Johnson from UCLA and Storm Glore from University of Colorado, Denver. Gigi and Storm not only have been central to us getting this program going and Gigi bringing Alex into our life, but also they were the co-curators and co-hosts of a really remarkable 25-hour-long music policy conference that they held last Thursday, Friday, the Amplify Music Conference. So Gigi and Storm, I welcome you to today's program and would just love to hear your thoughts on how it went, how you're doing, if you're caught up on sleep, and specifically if there's some takeaways and some next steps that our audience should be plugging into as you continue the efforts.
I don't know if it's caught up on sleep as much as caught up on family, grading, eating, bathing. No. It was a good event. We ended up having, Storm, how many different countries and states do we have?
We had 21 countries represented and 23 states.
And this is kind of the ultimate stone soup that we put out our bowl of water and a few rocks and said, come bring your vegetables and come bring your rice and come bring your meat. And so we ended up having 39 panels starting at 1 o'clock Pacific last Thursday and ending at 2 o'clock Pacific last Friday, covering countries, regions, topics, matchmaking people who'd never met before. So we have 39 videos that are 15 minutes to a half an hour long that Alex has been working on as well. And we are curating and cleaning up the audio. I think all of them recorded, much to my shock and amazement. One audio you'll have to be really patient with. And we should have those up starting Monday the links will come from amplifymusic.org, which I put on the chat board, as well as they'll be linked in from YouTube channels so that you can share this. To me, one of the big outcomes was a lot of people don't know what other people are up to. This is a great organization, and you guys are all part of great organizations that are working on your areas of expertise, but some people had no idea what was happening with data in Brazil and what Brazil's already doing. I know Don was in a great panel that was looking at data from various places, that there are people who are looking at creating whole new organizations in Europe that are matching up with some of the organizations that we might have in the United States that are great connective tissue. So I will put in the chat bar. The one thing we did have, which is an interesting option, is to carry over the conversation in a Slack channel so that you can go there, find the resources, and connect up with people. When the videos come out, we'll be re-emphasizing the Slack channel and probably finding yet another place for people to gather to talk about what they can learn from each other. Storm, anything you'd like to expand on from that synopsis?
Yes, but Gigi and I did lose a lot of sleep, but we were very pleased. As she pointed out, some of the connections that were made, we did see ourselves as Switzerland and as sort of aggregators of some of the great minds in this space. But speaking of great minds, Michael, Don, Kate, and Quinde from Music Policy Forum, y'all were excellent, the panels you did, and we really appreciate your support in all this. There were very thought-provoking conversations that happened, and I think when you check out these videos, you'll see that there was a lot of great ideas passed and a lot of connections made. So we're very pleased. And again, a shout out to Alex for all his work during that conference. And you all are seeing just how awesome he is too. And he and Cassie Cowan, who works with Matt Cowell at Majestic Collaborations, they were essential to this too. And so we're really thankful for them being part of the team as well, and Allie Cornish there too. So thank you all.
I was going to put at least my email in the chat in case people want to follow up. We've had a lot of people suggesting new experiences, endeavors, educational stuff. I both run Marimel, but I also have my hat at UCLA Music, and we're looking at developing some new online programs. I know people have a lot of unemployed or underemployed people in their lives, looking at what might be good continuing education while people are sort of rebuilding their work. So,
well, and I think on that point, one of the things that a lot of us are thinking about and are struggling with and are, kind of navigating in an interesting way is the shutdown and the use of Zoom technology and these type of platforms has certainly accelerated the global conversation in ways that, the more traditional in-person limited, conversation is just difficult for a lot of people to access. And so again, while we always hold up the, necessity of the privilege to have a computer that can run these platforms and access to good Wi-Fi and all that, but there also is a privilege built into who can come to Washington for my conference, who can go to Toronto for our CMW work. I mean, the ability to kind of virtually bring these communities together and elevate these ideas and make these connections is really powerful. And again, you guys took it to a whole nother level. So we just really thank you and thanks for joining us for the recap and look forward to seeing where that Amplify conversation goes. So awesome.
Thank
Well,
you.
let's move into our next conversation, which I'm super excited by, and hopefully all the folks joining us today are excited by. If you're not excited by it, you're probably in the wrong Zoom, because we're going to bring in Bobby Garza and Don Pitts, who are our partners with Music Cities Together. Bobby, we'll have you introduce yourself a little bit, Bobby, for those who don't know you, but he's what are we calling you? You're the Chief Technical Advisor, I think is the title we gave you. That sounded pretty legit right there. But as most of you know, Music Cities Together earlier this year put a free survey tool into the field to basically do two things. One is to be create a space for music workers and individuals who are interested in sort of sharing their experience in terms of what the shutdown is meaning to them, to kind of create a data set to try to understand what that is looking like. And then also we wanted to create a free tool that would be a resource either for cities that were looking to put something into their community locally, or organizations that were just looking for inspiration. And again, I think most of the folks in this conversation know that Don Pitts and Sound Music Cities has really been driving in the United States the whole music census and local music research field. And over the past number of years, I think over 14,500 musicians and music workers have participated in these local surveys. So the intent with the free survey tool basically is to try to take the learnings from those surveys in terms of the methodology getting better, and just sort of us all improving as a group and try to put it out there for everybody. Again, one of the major priorities and one of the whole reasons we formed Music Cities Together, which was scheduled to launch, I think on March 19th at South by, is this whole notion of democratizing data collection and access to data, because we think it's absolutely vital that people have tools and resources and the ability to use quantifiable data to understand their scenes, but we also know that it needs to be affordable and accessible, and needs to be able to be deployed in a way that makes sense given the resources of most of our music communities. So with that extraordinarily long introduction, Don and Bobby, you're going to walk us through some of the kind of key inferences and top level findings from this particular survey tool. And then we've opened up the chat, and we would love to hear questions and comments from participants in today's conversation. So Don and Bobby, take it away.
All right, Bobby, I'll let you go in a second, but I just want to let you know that I'm going to be managing the chat while Bobby's talking so if anybody kind of comes up with a question, we'll ping it and either answer it right there, or we can address it towards the end. But either way, but it's a pleasure working with Bobby. I've known Bobby for decades. I think he's one of the most brilliant minds when it comes to translating music needs to policy needs and policy. So he was the author of a lot of Austin's really progressive pro-music policy in the last 15 years in Austin. So everything from the reform of our event process to reforming of our South by review process for all the activations that we had to manage to venues and so forth. So it's a pleasure him getting involved in Music Cities together. So after that, I'll take it away, Bobby.
Thanks, Don. That was, I'll have to pay you later for that really glowing introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I spent the first half of my career working in public policy and for elected officials. The last probably a little bit more than a decade or so, really focusing on music policy and trying to figure out where the intersections between elected officials and practical business sense really hit. And to put my money where my mouth was, after I left public service, I went and ran a music and entertainment company that did 800 shows a year all across Texas and produced multiple festivals, and also did dozens of brand activations and stuff. So I really wanted to understand that part of the business, and I have a passion for music. I was a musician that toured and recorded for a long time, so these issues are pretty close to my heart, and I am super excited to get to talk to you guys about what our initial findings are. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this will work. The goals for today, as I understood them, was, as we're continuing to look at this survey, it's super timely and pretty important to start trying to glean some insights in terms of what we're looking at and what the survey is. We wanted to share whatever those top level insights were, let you know if we saw some general trends as people are continuing to respond to the survey, and just sort of give you my general observations about where things stand thus far. It's important to point out that the survey, in terms of what we've been working on, is that it wasn't meant to be a panacea or an exhaustive questionnaire about what was happening. What we really wanted to find out was what are the quick insights that we can provide that will help local, state, federal governments as they scramble to develop these initial policy responses. I think what we saw from the first couple of rounds of what happened with federal funding is, music in the industry was kind of an afterthought after a lot of other things. And I think that we wanted to make sure that we started to tell a human story so that local and state governments don't do the same thing. We also wanted to make sure that we established some interest from people that were responding to the survey and really get a baseline for future engagements. There's some really interesting work that's in some of the survey that I think has solved some problems that we've consistently had in terms of how we talk about the music industry to local and state governments. So I'm excited to talk about that as well. And then the last thing we wanted to do is really establish a framework for how we talked about the industry, specifically related to employment. I think we all kind of know that it's a moving and evolving thing as the gig economy gets bigger. And I think that has some really exciting moments to it. And I think some of the findings that we've had from the survey also show that it is, there are some things that are exposed a little bit. So from a general informational standpoint, as the survey stands right now, the top 3 states that have been responding are Texas, North Carolina, and Louisiana. We have gotten, some survey responses from dozens of other states, but that's where the bulk of the respondents have come from. What do they look like right now? They look like it's mostly male, it's mostly Anglo. They do have some form of health insurance. They are mostly without dependents, but if they do have dependents, it is less than 2. What we're finding about their employment is that, I guess what we started thinking about as we were designing the survey was, we know some things, and we kind of want to see if these are validated through some of the some of the responses are not. And the first of which that Don and I talked a lot about is that the music industry has some employment that's less traditional than some other occupations. I think anecdotally, we all kind of know people that work in the industry that have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 jobs, depending on where they are. And sometimes situationally, that's a musician that's also a bar back, or that is also a door guy, or that, you know, works in some other segment of the industry. So we wanted to see if that anecdotal trend, you know, bore some fruit through the survey. We thought that, you know, those other occupations were probably represented as several different jobs. Some of them were in music, some of them were not. And, you know, the most obvious is that what's happening right now with the current pandemic is really shaping how people are working and responding to stuff. Mm-hmm. So we took occupation and divided it into almost a dozen different categories. So I'll talk about them a little bit, and, you know, if you guys have questions, you can ask about why we did what we did. But so we tried to take some of the stuff that people have anecdotally talked about and really provide some color to it. And we had some conversations about what the practical aspects of some of these things are and why they were important. So first of which we wanted to find out and hear from were the people that would necessarily define themselves as music creatives. So that's studio musicians and performers, composers and arrangers, that type of thing. We also wanted to hear from what we called presenters and venues. So we made a very concerted effort to split out venue, bar, event support staff from what we considered to be presenters and venues. So presenters and venues would be owners and managers and salary staff of event producers and promoters, as well as talent buyers, festivals, you know, and the different types of venues. We also wanted to try to call out that, you know, the support staff may be living a different type of reality than some of the folks that are presenters and venues. Namely that a lot of those people are employed on an hourly basis, and they provide support to some of this other stuff. But I think there's something that we want to try to flesh out there and see how it, you know, the pandemic stuff is actually impacting. So some of the other occupational categories that are there are what you would expect. So the recording industry, labels and distribution, you know, wholesale and retail sales of music, agents and business services, you know, music publishing. We also added a line for production support. So that would be, you know, the drivers that provide transportation, some of the lighting and staging folks, some of the riggers and stuff that, you know, stagehands that, you know, probably live an individual reality as well. And then we have a couple other categories for music development and for manufacturing. So we thought all of those are material to this kind of survey. The responses are a little bit interesting, and I'll get into those a little bit later. And then we really wanted to understand what the employment types were for folks in the music industry. So are you freelance? Are you doing gig work or contract work? Is this a full-time proposition for you? Are you part-time? Do you own or co-own a venue or a production company, or are you unemployed right now? Mm-hmm. So here are the things that we found, and I do want to take great pains to kind of talk about that. The survey is still open. So what we talk about here are the initial insights, just sort of a point in time look at where we were this morning. I started looking again this morning. We've been watching it, you know, over the last couple of weeks. One of the things that Don always talks about that I think is the most interesting is from his work with survey tools is that, you know, the first day that you announce stuff, you generally get a big bump. And then the last day generally gets a big bump. So I'm kind of excited to think that this could potentially have, you know, some legs today. I guess that's much like ticket buying for venues and whatnot. You know, everybody waits till the last minute to buy their tickets to the show. So what do we know? We know that overwhelmingly the respondents are gig workers, and they've designated that as their primary occupation. So that's necessarily people that are, you know, living their existence based in contracts. We also know that they're anticipating a loss of income across all 4 quarters of 2020. And we kind of thought that was important because a lot of people were thinking about, you know, what's happening this quarter and potentially next quarter. But I think the reality is for a lot of segments of the music industry that not just these 4 quarters of 2020, but probably also, into 2021 is gonna have some level of impact on the music industry. A little bit greater than 60% say that their primary source of income loss is more than 50% of what they made in 2019, which I think is pretty significant and a little bit shocking. And then 84% of the respondents thus far have said that their primary work has been impacted with postponed or canceled contracts. I think that sort of tracks back to people saying that they're, working contract-based work. And also, I think it's important to point out that, depending on where you're responding, some of those numbers could be skewed. One artist or another, for example, could be in the middle of a touring cycle or an album release. And I think we kind of need to dig into that a little bit more to really understand what some of those things kind of mean. I mean, that has downstream effects for festivals and tours and whatnot. So just something to call out. What else do we know? We know that 38% of the respondents thus far do not have a secondary occupation, which was interesting. And that 35% of those secondary occupations are also contract-based. To add a little bit more color to that, 62% of the respondents thus far have identified themselves as a music creative. So that's necessarily those folks that are singers and songwriters and engineers and whatnot. Beyond that, the next 4 or 5 groups were the presenters and venue folks, agents and business services, venue bar, event support staff, production support, and then music education. I will say that while those look like a lot, the representative shares have dropped off dramatically after music creatives, which is interesting. And then the last bit about what we were asking, we were trying to get some attitudes to what we thought were ideas that had been floating around the policy marketplace about how to best improve the station of folks in the music industry. And what we learned was that paid sick leave and paid family leave had the strongest distributions, or I guess the strongest reactions. Either some folks found it incredibly helpful, or some folks found it not helpful at all. I think that's probably tied to how you derive your income, whether you're a full-time employee, you're a part-time employee, or you're a contract worker that wouldn't necessarily have, some type of leave built into whatever their contract was. Overwhelmingly, the strongest response in our 1 to 5 stuff was, what unemployment benefits would make the most amount of difference. Followed behind that is some suspension of rent or mortgage, utility bill suspension, and deferred tax payments, all of which are not necessarily surprising because those are the things that keep money in your pocket on a month-to-month basis and a quarter-to-quarter basis for tax payment type stuff. What we are also finding is that there is a high degree of pessimism about help from the government. So 90% of the respondents said that they felt not confident at all or somewhat confident that they would be able to get help from the government, which I think is incredibly material to what's happening right now. In terms of where folks in the industry are looking to find some level of assistance, this kind of fell interestingly where we thought it would be. So folks were looking to the federal government for funding first, to state and local governments for assistance second, local philanthropies, regional and national philanthropies, and then last, direct funding from fans through merch sales and that type of thing. Don and I have had some conversations about, there might be a perceived barrier to entry with sales of merch. Some merch folks require a minimum number of orders or a minimum purchase before you can do that. And if you don't have cash right on hand to do those things, you probably aren't able to make all that money. But there are some interesting platforms that don't require those types of barriers. So that might be something to explore. In terms of what the perceived barriers were for people actually able to access some assistance, it is generally what you would think. There is a lack of information about how to apply for some of this assistance. Documenting lost income was something that was really had a high degree of response as well. And then lack of overall funding to actually, get the limited pool of dollars that are there. And then the last thing I wanted to show, which it's kind of a bummer we can't share screens, but I wanted to show the graphic that Don and his team kind of put together that we used as a social media campaign. So one of the ways that we've been successful in getting some good responses in Austin is to partner with a bunch of different local organizations. So here in Austin, we had enlisted HAM, which is, you know, a great organization that provides health assistance to musicians, Austin Music Foundation, Austin Musicians Association, EQ Austin, the Red River Cultural District, SIMS, which provides mental health assistance for musicians, all with Music Policy Forum and Sound Music Cities to kind of help distribute this thing. And I think that, you know, moving forward, that's probably a tool and tactic that we can all utilize a little bit better. But, you know, our community partners have been amazing at helping us spread the word and get people involved as much as possible. So that's really all I got. We were, you know, as I said before, we're still in the midst of trying to sort through all this data. And I think that for us, the most important thing right now is to get the survey completed and closed, and then really have some smarter people start look at some of the deviations with the 1 to 5 strongest to least strongest policy improvements and let folks know what's really helping or not. I think that the other stuff is all incredibly informative and hopefully will help some folks as they're thinking about what the next solutions are.
That's awesome, Bobby. Thank you. I appreciate that. And sorry about the, whatever the heck that was. That was cool. So yeah, I've got a couple questions and I guess we'd encourage people to, are we going to open up the chat and just see what happens? And if hopefully people will share appropriate conversations instead of some of the other stuff that we've seen. But I think, you know, I want to ask Don and Bobby to speak a little bit about this whole question of trying to create contiguous data. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm interested in is when I was at Future Music Coalition and we did the artist revenue stream research project, you know, in the whenever that was, 2013, something like that. Part of the idea was to try to sort of do some benchmarking over time. And part of what I really appreciate about the work that you guys are doing with this is, you know, we have the potential of basically looking at the 14,500 music workers that participated in music censuses in the last couple of years, and then with a snapshot now early in the crisis, and potentially then something at a future benchmark to get a sense of how things have changed just in a couple of years and what policy implications that may have or business implications that might have. I mean, could you speak to this whole notion of benchmarking? I know it's something that, and again, I'm not a numbers guy at all, and so I really am limited in my understanding of how to do this right. But I'm concerned a tiny bit that there are so many surveys that are just out in the world right now that what ultimately is that going to mean if there's just like 1,000 different methodologies and 1,000 different surveys and 1,000 different kind of collection strategies going on. Could you speak to that? Oh, great. Alex just put a link to the slides.
Yeah, I'll go first and then let Bobby answer. But I think getting to the benchmarking aspect, I think what we've learned in the last 2 or 3 years doing this is that every city wants to benchmark. The first thing they ask is, you know, can you compare us to other cities? And I think it's, you know, Peter had some struggles with, you know, I both had some struggles with, like, there really is no data set like that we can share. And I think what this pandemic I've seen and noticed is really, I think, rapidly pushing the democratization. I think if we're going to be lucky or be successful moving forward down the road as far as data collection, what does that look like? I think asking the same question the same way in the same cities is going to allow that to happen. And so I think we're on the right path from like I said, democratizing this work. But benchmarking I think is hugely important. If you look at the other creative sectors, they have somewhat of a benchmark data set. And I think for music, we don't really have that. So.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's interesting. So where do you guys see this conversation going? What are the next steps? You said, so the survey is open. Remind me, how long is the survey going to stay open?
So we've extended it. It's this weekend. We extended it. We had some new press coverage in Austin. We were gonna stop it. So in Austin, it's going to run till tomorrow night. I think New Orleans and it's going to run till next week. I haven't got with those guys to see when they're going to do their final push. So it's kind of a rolling closeout, I think, for the next after next week, and then hopefully we can get into the crunching of the data to kind of really share that.
Awesome. All right, so we will obviously be covering this issue as we move forward in these weekly programs and through our newsletter, and we'll be sharing kind of more information and resources. I think for now, again, apologies for Bobby's slides, but again, Alex has put the link to the slides in the chat and a link to the survey, again, at musiccitystogether.org. There's a good question coming in from Mike Henry, and Mike, thanks for joining us today. He's wondering, are you seeing, and I'm not sure if you would pick this up yet in the survey, this may be more of a general question, but are artists receiving any meaningful income from live performance video streams? And are there some better tools than others to do that work? I think maybe that's outside the scope of what you guys are looking at the survey specifically, and actually might be a great question for our next guest, Jordan. But do you have anything to say on that topic?
Yeah, that's not something that we looked at in particular. I mean, I think that our first goal was to try to respond to some very generalized, health and safety type questions that we could answer for policymakers and elected officials. I will tell you what I think everybody's seeing is that, a lot of those live streams are now starting to get sponsored. So I think the hope is that musicians will be generating more revenue than just, some digital tip jar or something like that. I mean, I hope that it's a much larger revenue stream for them. But, if you think about what happens with other forms of, electronic streaming or something, for example, that those dividends are a whole lot less than what happens with generalized live music.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for presenting, and Bobby, thanks for putting the slides together. Everybody can access them from the URL that Alex put into the chat. And apologies for the whatever chicanery that was. I'll have to go have a talk with my teenage son and see what he's been up to upstairs. But anyway, thank you guys so much, and we look forward to continuing the data conversation. So now we're going to pivot into our next segment, where we're really taking a deep dive at one of my favorite topics, which is looking at the evolving, emerging role of non-commercial radio and public radio in the United States as it relates to local music ecosystems. And this issue broadly is near and dear to a lot of our hearts. It's near and dear to my heart. I've been incredibly fortunate to work on advocacy on behalf of non-commercial radio since my early days in like 1999 with Future Music Coalition. And really one of the main reasons we are so passionate about this is because we know in the United States, again, that commercial radio really fills one particular need, which is to maximize ad revenue on behalf of shareholders and to identify specific targeted demographics that are interested in sort of playing a matchmaker with advertisers and trying to maximize those revenue streams. And non-commercial radio always has had and always will have a different mission, which is, again, trying to be a service to a community that needs to be reached. And in the music context, that has become more and more important over the last 15 years. And it's been really fulfilling and sort of encouraging and a little bit remarkable to see the growth of that sector. So I want to shout out, before we bring in our guests, a national effort, the Non-Com Music Alliance, which is a collaboration of over 100 non-commercial radio stations, public radio stations that are music-focused, music-facing. It's not a programming collaborative. It's just a sort of a coalition of these stations that are working together to really help understand how do they talk to music stakeholders and to the public and others and other policymakers, et cetera, about what does public radio mean as it relates to music. And again, in our conferences and our programming, we are always happy and eager to highlight interesting models and different things that are happening with public radio. Something I'll just hold up real quick, an organization that we've been thrilled to highlight in previous conferences, and we talk a lot about, is WWZ in New Orleans. Many of you are fans of New Orleans music, fans of Jazz Fest. I'm very mindful this weekend. My wife was going to pick up my daughter at college, and their plan was to drive to New Orleans to watch Stevie Nicks at Jazz Fest, and that was going to be this weekend's trip. Of course, there is no Jazz Fest this year, so WWZ has taken it virtual, and they've created basically a Festing at Home program where they've taken the legendary Jazz Fest cubes and created a schedule where they're playing legendary Jazz Fest sets over the period of time that would be happening right now during the fest. And that's been a real source, I think, for New Orleans music fans and for people who really miss that community and miss that music. It's been a real source of joy and catharsis. And so we just love these examples of stations like OZ kind of moving on the fly. But now we're going to focus on a station I'm really excited to learn more about. We're joined by Jordan Lee, who is the program director at Radio Milwaukee. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So part of why we were, and I want everybody to know, when we went to the National Non-Com Music Alliance and said, what is your best example of a station that is really embracing this new model as sort of like the station as community hub and sort of a real public service mission. And I said, and I don't want to talk to KXP because we talked to them too much. They said, Radio Milwaukee. I mean, they really held you guys up as an example of a station that is really pushing the sort of conversation. So let me, start by just asking you to go big picture and talk a little bit about Radio Milwaukee, your mission, and what are the different kind of platforms that you're working on right now.
Absolutely.
Actually, let's start before the crisis.
Yeah. Let me give you like cliff notes on what is Radio Milwaukee. It was started by a brain trust of creatives and musicians who were here. Most notably, Peter Buffett was here running Narada Records and said, wouldn't it be great if there was a radio town square where people of different walks of life felt connected? As is in Milwaukee and many, many cities in America, you've got your segmented music and it's very separate. I like this, I don't like that. The mission was to create a little mush of all, to find a place where like-minded people could really congregate. So that was the mission over 15 years ago to start. And we've been on the air for 13 years. And it's been a wonderful way for us to use in one of America's most racially segregated cities. We're using music as this tool to highlight the cool things that are happening in our different communities. So that's been the work since day one. It continues to be the work today, even during these times we're in now. But we've always tried to pull different levers to make that happen. So, the first big lever to pull was getting this FM signal to do something special and play a diverse range of music. And we're lucky we have brothers and sisters in the Alliance like The Current in Minneapolis, like KCRW in LA, who are shining examples of how you can be really eclectic and diverse, but still make smart music for smart people be the primary, product. So we align ourselves with that idea, and then we've expanded into other, I think of that as like the parent. We have a lot of like sibling programs and nieces and nephews in our family now. Big endeavors like our Backline music program, which is a collaboration with Generator, which is a organization here in the Milwaukee area that's a business incubator. So we've worked with them to collaborate on creating grant funding and resources for the musicians in our city. And this is modeled not too far off from things that exist in places like Austin, places like Seattle. There are these great support systems and networks for artists to participate in. We didn't have that here in Milwaukee. We also, we're part of the public school system. And so for us, like music education, this is like every city in the nation has some arts education slashing, and public schools can't have quality arts education anymore. We wanted to kind of be a stopgap for that. We have this wonderful program with Grammy Award-winning artist Grace Weber, who's a Milwaukee native, where it's a music almost feedback program where it's an open mic for kids to participate in, but we bring in national artists to kind of give them notes and to perform for them to inspire them. And the criteria to participate in this program is you have to be in high school. You can't join this if you're a young adult. You can't join this if you're an adult musician. So those are just some of the many little brother and sister programs that we have under our umbrella. But we've always thought of it as the mission is to use music and storytelling and sense of place to connect our community. And it's working anecdotally. I mean, the diversity we see and participation is great. Right now, our pivot is looking at how are we being a trusted resource for people on any side of the creative coin? It's both for the musicians, the creatives, the venue owners, the economy of the city, and for the other people who are the fans and the ticket buyers and the consumers. They both need that connective tissue right now. So our response to this time has been actually, I feel like I kind of sound like gloating when I say this, but it's easy for us because it's in our DNA to serve people. Like that's what we were created to do 15 years ago. So when people say, I can't get my music anymore, it's easy for me to say, well, I'll go into our archives of performances and every night we'll air a rebroadcast of one of our hundreds of great studio sessions we've had over the years. It wasn't something we were doing before, but to react in that way, it seems like easy pivots for us right now.
So tell me about your different platforms. So so you've got the over-the-air signal.
Yeah, so the primary bread and butter is Everything is Radio Milwaukee, and that's in Milwaukee, that's the 88.9 FM on stream and on app and all the places you can imagine. Every smart speaker can listen to it. Then we have a couple of sub products within our specialty program grid. We have a show called Rhythm Lab Radio, which is syndicated in Chicago and other stations throughout the nation, but also as a pillar in its own programming. And then even beyond that, we have sub channels like our 414.fm, which is an all Milwaukee channel that we play on HD2, but also in stream and in app form. So those products are kind of what you listen to, right? That's the on-air side. And then we have the story side of our business, which is, you could think of This American Life, if you could squeeze that down in a 2.5-minute story. We've been doing that since day one. And those programs have evolved into things that are virtual space now, virtual spaces for people to connect. We produced a film 2 years ago called Invisible Lines. This film is about the lines that people of color have to cross in divided places that you can't see. It's these social and economic lines that don't always, you can't put them on a graph. You can't always tell them, oh, that's the problem. So we have this movie that we've created about those inequities, and we use this as an education tool to talk to other communities about how they're interfacing with one another. And we've been able to bring that programming into a Zoom space and have virtual screenings and conversations around that content. We also have a large series of podcasts that we do that have to do with the local art scene, the local food and dining scene, movies. Those have all, again, found a place where our movie podcast is now really focused on streaming platforms and really focused on how you can support independent filmmakers at this time. So all of those are working in that way. And then the last thing is really, it's the on-site programming. And of course, these times have kind of turned that upside down. But what we've tried to do is kind of adapt them to the heart of what we're doing is still there. So we have this series called Wanna Grab Coffee. Those are happening weekdays in the mornings. It's a capped Zoom meeting, but we try to get a diversity of people to come in to have conversations around, one's just for parents, and it's just conversations around how are you dealing with the kids right now? What's homeschooling like? Are you navigating this well? And again, having that sense of place and community was already what we wanted to do every day from day one. So to do this now, we're already thinking in that way. Right.
So, I'm hearing anecdotally, whatever. I could be totally off base, but I'm definitely sensing a lot of trepidation in the public radio community about, the impact of the shutdown and what that's going to mean for donor bases, what that's going to mean just for, how are you guys? What are you thinking? It's such a strange dichotomy, because I feel like so many people, whether you're looking for public affairs programming or for the type of programs that you've described, as consumers, we're all just sucking this up, and we are so thankful for it. And it's like public radio is shining in a way that it's, like this is a moment for public radio. But then again, you look at like, what is this going to mean around the bend, and how is this going to be?
Yeah. We've been lucky to be really, our growth has been supported by financial growth as well. So, taking on those big programs I discussed earlier, those are not the primary, right? The primary is the radio signal. And that's the thing that's being really like, I have comments, I could share screen caps for days of how grateful people are to have that and know that, oh my gosh, it's lunchtime. I don't even know what time it is, but I hear the request show, I know it's lunchtime. So, our feeling right now is that we're continuing to sow those seeds of value throughout our time with the public. And I think what's going to happen, and we're already kind of seeing this happen, is those who can support are going to step up. Those who can't support are going to advocate for us. And we're giving those who can't support the tools to advocate, to share, and to amplify our existing programming, because the more people that care, I feel like, fundraising in public radio is like going fishing. And if you're in a pond with a lot of fish, you're going to get the support you need. But if you go to the pond that has 6 fish and you're asking those 6 to carry all of the financial burden, maybe one of them will step up. So for us, I'm just trying to make sure that all those little fishies out there are falling in love with why this exists and realizing that public radio is not just an FM frequency. It's a community. It's a place you belong. It's a place you can find friends. It's like, honestly, we have real stories of it's places where people meet their life partners. It's places where people start their businesses with people that they meet in the community that we have kind of convened, because the common thread in that community, it's not a demographic or a psychographic. It is a psychographic. Sorry, it's not an age or a race or a gender. It's a way you think, and those people are rallying together right now.
It's interesting. Let's talk a little bit. Again, this is a program about music cities and thinking about sort of the complicated ecosystem that makes up a music community. And again, we've been talking for several years about the sort of unique role that non-com radio plays in that, as institutions that are committed to place and are really not being sycophants on behalf of the scene or cheerleaders, but want the scene to thrive.
Yeah.
And I'd like to learn a little bit more about Milwaukee, because that's a community I haven't spent a lot of time in. And it strikes me as an outsider as one of the dynamics that a lot of communities play with is, like, how do we define success? What does success look like for our musicians and our professional music workers?
Absolutely.
Always, just start there. What does that look like from your standpoint, Milwaukee?
I think for us right now, at least from our organization and a lot of those other levers I talked about that we've pulled, our hope is that they represent, they stay, and they invest in the city. If you become the next Lizzo and you're from our community, I understand you're going to have a lot of work in LA, you're going to have a lot of work in London, you're going to have a lot of work in Tokyo. Go do that work. But when you're there, remind Tokyo you are from Milwaukee. And when you're back, reinvest that money, not unlike someone like Pharrell, who has a wonderful festival on the beach in Norfolk, right? That's where he's from. He's a Virginia Beach guy. His money is coming back to Virginia Beach. We find that that's success. So we've had artists from Milwaukee who have done cool things. There's plenty of bands who have made it from here. But continuing to gauge success to us means that you see these people, they're around, but they're also on, they're on Pitchfork too, and they're in your streams, and they're all over the place. So that's been important for us. And then also, like, going back to what we were talking just a moment ago, is like these musicians can raise their families in this city. One of the things we always tout is Milwaukee's an extremely affordable city. I own a home for what some people pay a quarter of their rent. I mean, it's really a very affordable city on a lake that's full of summer festivals. And our summer festival business, of course, is something that we're looking at how that's going to pivot right now. And we're having conversations. We just had a wonderful meeting this week with our team about how do we assist in amplifying things, not unlike what OZ is doing right now in New Orleans, because we are about to get into a long calendar of canceled festivals in the city of summer festivals on the lake. And we're having conversations with them about how do we make that work.
Right. So are you seeing, a lot of the communities that we talk to are absolutely seeing the affordability issue in terms of artists moving in, because, are you seeing a Chicago influx as Chicago becomes more expensive? Are you seeing a Minneapolis influx? Are things pretty stable in terms of your artist community?
They are. There's a great organization who's doing more work in this space right now to get that information. They're called Imagine MKE. And we spoke about this earlier. They're kind of being a stopgap for the fact that the mayor's office doesn't have a cultural department or music department. So they're doing this on an independent nonprofit model, but they're getting us that information. But for me, anecdotally, as an active member of the music scene, there are more shows. There's new little venues popping up all the time. They're always busy. There's our larger venues are hosting local musicians more often. than not. Our friends, the Paps Theater Group, are a part of NIVA right now. And I'm realizing that some of the concerts that my organization was sponsoring that were coming up on my calendar were headlining Milwaukee artists. When a Milwaukee artist can sell 1,500 tickets, we're able to say that they're succeeding and they're able to be a part of our economy and our ecosystem in a pretty impactful way. So that is kind of our bar of amplification that we really want to support that. We want to make sure that it's not just good for the coffee shop song guy, it's also great for the touring, headlining, Netflix synced artists. Like, we want them to have their opportunities to shine here too.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I appreciate you mentioning NIVA, which again is the National Independent Venue Association. And, they're doing remarkable work in terms of trying to go from not being an organization to having over 1,000 venue members across the country, and really going to Capitol Hill and trying to advocate for some resources. And, we at Music Policy Forum and Music Cities Together are in close coordination around reopening communities and all the work that's going to happen to try to get any sense of normalcy back into the music scene. One other place that we are excited, and I think is probably something that you can speak to as we move into the next stages of reopening our music economy, is that you have a relationship with music fans that is probably unique in your community. And again, not to shit talk commercial radio, but part of the
That's okay.
End of local, we'll get Zoom bombed and shit talk. But part of the reason that radio consolidation has been so damaging in the last 25 years is that many communities have lost that live and local voice. So central. And now, again, for music fans, public radio is picking up that mantle. And so when you guys are telling your audiences that a certain venue, that you're standing behind a show at a certain venue, that means something, because you're basically saying that we trust that this is going to be a safe and a worthwhile experience.
Absolutely. And our way of supporting whatever those opportunities are. I know Mike asked earlier this question on like how are artists turning this moment into something that they can make significant money on. We have this artist in Milwaukee named Brett Newski. I mean, this guy tours the world. He should be in Australia right now, but he's here in Milwaukee, and he's using Patreon and other platforms to make sure that he can find a way to get some gigs and support himself with his fan base. And we're trying to amplify those things. Our job as a radio station is to amplify the good work that the others are already doing. There was a wonderful collective of musicians who did a festival on Instagram this past weekend called Forward Music Fest. And the festival was aimed to support the independent small clubs that, your 400, your 200, your 100 cap rooms in Milwaukee that are the lifeblood of all the working musicians that we were just talking about with Bobby a moment ago. We amplify that. We support that, as does all of our other non-com. We're lucky. We have great public radio in Milwaukee. We have WMSC. We have great NPR here. So we're really lucky that they also get behind that and support that. And they're making thousands of dollars to keep these venues at least afloat throughout this time. And that's musicians supporting the venues that support them. I think when you're building a community like we have been for the last 15 years plus, it seems to me like this moment, we're made for success on this, because we're already taking care of each other. We've weathered smaller storms. So this big storm, like, we're just kind of really doing good work right now.
So I'm going to end our segment with a question that's a little bit of a curveball, and I hope it's not unfair. And if you don't like the question, just draw something on the screen and we'll move on. But there's an issue you touched on briefly that is really something very important to our work. And I'd love to see if you could speak to it a little bit, especially in the midst of the crisis, but also thinking beyond the crisis. And that is, what is the role of Radio Milwaukee and of the music community in engaging the sort of very difficult questions around equity and social justice?
Yeah.
And, I think Milwaukee is very sneakily one of the most, sort of segregated communities in the United States. And to what extent, again, is that I think you touched on this, but how do you think about, again, music and your community building efforts and engaging in those broader kind of social questions?
For me, it's representation. When people see themselves in something, whatever that thing is, they automatically have permission to be there. If you are a transgendered woman of color and you see no one in the room that you can identify with, You are not given permission to be participating in space. Our goal has always been to be inclusive, but also use equitable practices to make sure that we remember that, as you had touched on earlier, there's privilege in certain touch points that you can reach because I just grew up, I had this thing. My parents raised me in I grew up in a home where my parents were both there. They both participated. We got what we needed. I have friends through music who didn't grow up that way. So giving them an extra leg up to get the technology, the communication, the resources they need to meet me where I'm at, that makes it that then these artists can really thrive. And then our community has value. And I think in a city like ours, where again, we have hyper racial segregation. America loves to consume Black art. We have been doing that for a very, very long time. When I can show off the amazing art coming out of the Black community from my city, people invest their money into that art because I didn't know we had great rappers and R&B artists who live across the street from me. These artists, they get supported. And when we put them on and we work with great organizations to help support what they're trying to do, it amplifies that work. We don't do the work for them. We only just amplify it. All of a sudden, then the floodgates open up.
I thank you, Jordan, for speaking to that. And I think it's so important because, again, part of the very pragmatic conversation that the music community is having right now is how do we fit in a crisis situation where every sector is impacted. And sometimes music and particularly the independent music community does not want to get elbows out and basically say, we provide something that's different than other industries. And again, we're not trying to put other industries down, but just recognize that music is humanity, it's empathy, it's community. It does all these things that needs to be held up.
Yes.
And again, as we move forward in this crisis and we start to think about reopening communities, we need to see music front and center, and we need some of this federal support. Again, we've talked a lot over the last couple of weeks. There's going to be probably one more shot. There's going to be about a $3 trillion, spending package coming out of Capitol Hill a month from today, in all likelihood. And where music fits into that is going to really dictate the ability for these, ecosystems to survive and thrive. So yeah. It's a very vulnerable time, but it also is a time, again, where we've got to own the impact that we have in communities and what we mean for people. And again, no disrespect to, the WWE, but it's a very different thing. It's a very different thing than what we do than pro wrestling or, other stuff. So.
And if I may, I think one of the things we've done that is another useful tool that a lot of our brothers and sisters in non-com radio are doing is we're aligning ourselves with the for-profits, the large organizations, and the other parts of our city's fabric. Believe you me, when all is said and done, I have Northwestern Mutual Tower, downtown Milwaukee. We are close partners with them on many, many things. If they get a lot of money through stimulus, there will be a trickle-down effect that will be able to find its way into local artists because they work with us on some of these programs I mentioned earlier. Now, I shouldn't say if anybody from Northwestern Mutual hears this, don't misquote me on this, but the idea that I have a lot of trust that, and that can go down all the way to small businesses. I mean, we're supporting with free PSAs right now to keep our local businesses information on the airwaves, and they will hire these musicians again. They will keep the delivery driver who is a jazz saxophonist. He's going to keep delivering pizza right now because we're helping to let everyone know that the ecosystem is alive. So that's where community radio will thrive. And I agree. I think the AI robot that runs iHeartRadio is not going to do that.
That's right. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us. And we have some links there in the chat. Again, when the archive of this program is up, minus 90 seconds of bad things being drawn on the screen, we're going to circulate that link to everybody who registered for today's program and include a lot of the links that were mentioned today during the program. So we're going to wrap up today's show and thank everybody, thank our guests, obviously. So thank you to Jordan and thank you to Bobby and Don and Gigi and Storm. Always a huge thanks to our producer, Alex Dolvin, and we appreciate you all spending some of your Friday with us. I'm excited to tease next week's program, and I'll just say I'm glad we got our Zoom bombing out of the way because next week we're going to have an elected official and we're going to have a rock star. So we'll hopefully not be Zoom bombed during that presentation. So everybody have a great rest of your Friday, and thanks again, musicpolicyforum@gmail.com with questions, suggestions, ideas, etc. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.